So welcome to our, and Jay, if you want to start recording, just to let everyone know this session will be recorded. Welcome to our April online salon presentation. I'm so happy many of you chose to sign on and join us tonight. I know it's a busy time, as all of them are busy times. My name's Ellen Whiteman, and I'm the manager of the McDowell Foundation. The foundation funds teacher-led research in the province of Saskatchewan, such as the projects you're going to hear about tonight. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am currently on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homelands of the Métis. I do this acknowledgement from a genuine desire to recognize all my relations and my own place on this shared land that we all share through the treaty agreements. Joining us tonight are leaders from across the province and beyond. There are local association leaders, SDF executive, McDowell Foundation board members, SDF staff, ministry staff, superintendents, directors of education, school board trustees, principals and vice principals, members of the press, and so many other formal and informal leaders from education across the province. Welcome to you all. Our panel tonight consists of 3 research teams who've all participated in the direct call for research that we put out last July. When we made the decision to provide this special funding, I'm not sure we fully understood the impact COVID would have on schools this year, but we knew a historic and unprecedented event was unfolding, and that student and teacher voice, as always, would be a vital part of it as we moved through it together. We are fortunate to have Associate Executive Director Ian Cripps join us tonight from the SDF to bring a provincial perspective on the impact of the pandemic once the research teams have shared. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Each research team will present for 10 minutes, followed by a short reflection from Ian. Then we hope to open up the conversation. To ask questions or make comments, you can use the question and answer feature at the top of the screen, where you can either enter in questions or comments or vote on others. Voting will help a question or comment rise to the top. We also invite you to raise your hand if you wish to speak, and we can turn on your mic if that's your preferred way. And we will be recording tonight's session for those who are unable to attend, and it will be available on the McDowell website. Just before we get started, a quick thank you to Jay Selkin from STFPL, who's kindly joined us to offer technical support. If you have any difficulties, reach out to Jay in the chat. So we're going to start with Suzanne Zarwich and TJ Zarwich, lessons learned upon returning to school in COVID-19. I'll turn it over to them.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's presentation and thank you for giving up yet another evening for professional development electronically. Tonight, we're going to talk to you about our research. My name is Dr. Suzanne Zarwich. I'm a researcher with Saskatchewan Polytechnic, and I have been a researcher for more than 12 years since I retired from education in 2008, so quite a while ago. I've worked for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I've worked for Western University. I worked for the University of Saskatchewan at times. And now this project was under the umbrella of Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Our head researcher, primary investigator is Dr. Madeleine Press. And I'm working with a team of student researchers who were also very interested in this topic. My job was to oversee the research, to make sure that the anonymity of the participants was protected, to interview, to transcribe the interviews. And then the other researchers, one who could not be here tonight because she's taking a master's class, Jose Bumfrey, and the other one is TJ Zarwich, who is going to participate in this presentation as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn pages. Can everyone see this screen okay? Did the share work? Good, thank you. So we interviewed 12 participants, and they were from a wide variety of locations. So we had 12, 2 of them were male, the rest were female. 4 of the teachers had over 20 years experience. 5 of the teachers were novice teachers and were in their first 3 years of teaching. 5 of the teachers worked in large urban school divisions. either Saskatoon or Regina, and 3 of the teachers taught in semi-urban or small semi-urban centers. 3 of the teachers taught in very small communities. We wanted to get a very diverse perspective, and because we covered 7 different school divisions in our province and all parts of the province, I think the responses were varied, and I think we got a very good picture of teachers and how they feel through going back to school during COVID. And now I'm going to turn this over to junior researcher TJ Zwarch to talk to you about the themes that developed.
Awesome. So the first theme that we were looking at was teacher wellness. We're going through the stress levels, the mental health, the difference in workload, as well as the supports the teachers felt they received. Communication, the leadership within their school division, as well as leadership from the government. The protocols, school protocols, guidelines, PPE, procedures, all the different things that have changed with COVID, as well as technology and all the differences that COVID has brought to our schools with that. So theme 1, teacher workload and wellness. Teachers found that the workload significantly went up this year. One of the biggest reasons for that was the constant need to teach and reinforce new COVID guidelines and rules. They found it's left a lot less time to actually teach content, get through the outcomes, get through the indicators, get through the things they needed to get to, because it's been so much focus on the new mask guidelines, new distancing guidelines, hey, get your mask back on, things like that. From most days, it's difficult to get any meals in. More often than not, it's just trying to get a quick snack in during supervision, or the staff room is full, their classroom is full, and so they have to go into their car to get a quick bite to eat. The teachers found that they're missing a lot of the fun aspects of teaching. All of the time basically needs to be spent on planning accommodations for how they can teach, throughout the pandemic. And it's left it very difficult to find time for the fun things. Obviously, there's no extracurriculars and things like that. On top of that, the group work, the collaboration, they found it doesn't really exist because of all the need to put time into planning and things like that. There was a near consensus in the research that this was the highest workload year of their careers. Many have been feeling very pressured to teach online, even when they are homesick, even after they have been diagnosed with COVID, they're still being pressured to teach their class online. Or when they're in the classroom, teaching double duty, having to teach in the classroom as well as accommodate all the kids who are away. And at times they found that could be a lot. And so providing online learning, Zoom, Google Meet, Zoom Meets, things like that, while they're also teaching in the classroom as well. So theme 2, communication. One of the things the teachers, for the most part, found is they're receiving almost all of their information from social media. This began last year towards the middle to end of the school year, where the first communication sent out that most saw was a tweet from the Sask government that schools were going to be shutting down. And so halfway through the day, some of the classes were heading home. Other teachers didn't even know the communication until after the end of the day. And so that progressed through the summer as well, through talks of potential limiting class sizes to help with distancing. And now it's progressed into this year as well, often finding out about school cases on social media. Where this also gets difficult as well as they found it difficult to discern what is true, what are facts, and what are just rumors based on social media. More often than not, isn't exactly a reputable source. They found that teachers were getting very little support from the government message. It very much felt as though they were being put in a position to essentially look after the children so that the economy could stay open, people could go to work, as opposed to educators.
Sorry, TJ, I'm going to speed you up a little bit, and I'm going to move the slide as we get to the 2-minute mark for each one. So
awesome. Sounds good. That sounds good. Thank you. Onto PPE. So the teachers found that there was PPE available to them at the beginning of the year. They found it wasn't very high quality. They received cloth masks, as well as kind of unlabeled sanitizer, all-purpose sanitizer for hands, for desks, etc. The biggest concern, though, is that the lack of feedback on the protocols. Teachers felt as though they were the ones in the classrooms. They had a lot of really good ideas as to how to help, how to adopt good PPE protocols, but nobody was asking them, and so they didn't really feel as though they were able to help. That's on top of with how different every single school is. It became all of the procedures were difficult to adapt into each school because each school looked so totally different. Last one, technology. So what the teachers found throughout, specifically for technology, was that it was a lot more work learning the new learning systems, teaching in the classroom as well as in technology. But for the most part, they viewed it as a positive, because they kind of viewed it as something else they could add to their toolkit. Short term, not great. Long term, they felt as though it would help them a lot. They found last year the supplemental learning online was not at all successful because it was sprung on as a surprise, as well as it was optional, and so there was very little participation. Because of this, it has created a very big stigma this year for, no, we don't want to go back in line. It worked so terribly last year, whereas this year the teachers felt a lot more prepared for it, and so it's created a lot of negative stigma about going online, even though they felt that may be beneficial.
So in conclusion, I think there were 4 major lessons that we learned. The workload and work life was impacted significantly. Messaging is important, and what we hear is not always the way we feel, as this is what the teachers are saying, not always how they felt from what they were hearing. The big one being they felt more like they were being treated as childcare as opposed to being professional and being teachers. One size does not fit all situations. There were concerns about, in some of the rural communities, that they were forced into protocols when they had no cases. And, and things like the IA classroom was not addressed. How do you mask and wear your proper, safety equipment? Additional supports for teachers are needed. Like in a pandemic, instead of taking away supports, is what many teachers found, they need additional supports, including mental health professional development was something that was suggested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne and TJ. I appreciate the time. Now we're going to go to Brent Keane and Angela Siski. And my alarm's going off? And they're going to talk about reducing student stress during COVID. So I turn it over to them.
Okay, so I'm just sharing a screen. I just want to make sure that's going through.
Got it.
All right.
Okay. I'm Brent Keane.
And I'm Angela Siski, and our project was managing student stress during COVID-19. And so when we were creating our question, we had on the back of our mind kind of, again, keeping students safe, but as well as giving students tools that they can draw on to continue managing their stress. And so here's our question right here. Effectively, can we mitigate student stress over COVID-19 using strategies to promote self-regulation? And by the end of the study, it was very exciting to see that the strategies that we implemented were successful in reducing their stress.
So to create a little context, the students that we worked with were my grade 5 class in Turtleford Community School. There were 24 students at the beginning of the year. It's a pre-K to 12 school in a rural community. It draws on a large rural area and a nearby Thunderchild First Nation. As you can see from the map, as you can see from the map, the school in the top right is located near the edge of town with lots of open areas and natural settings available. So we selected mindfulness and outdoor learning because we have some experience both with the research and the practice of using these. Online learning was something we wanted to get more familiar with and use to empower students. We use as feedback a triangulated judgment, trying to draw on student journals, teacher observation, and a diagnostic survey with the idea that we could cross-check our findings to confirm the accuracy of each of them.
So with that standardized assessment piece, we found the revised child anxiety and depression scale, which is developed out of UCLA, in other words, the RCADS. And from that, we picked two subscales, the general anxiety disorder and panic disorder assessments, because that fit the project's need, as well as reduced the amount of questions that students had to answer independently. And so again, the goal was to capture a snapshot of what students were feeling at the very beginning of our project, and then at the very end of our project. So when you're looking at this pie chart, which is again, the results of the initial assessment, it was at the very beginning of the school year. And the context is key. So in our community, we had positive COVID cases, enough to move us to level 3. So at the start of the school year, students are coming on alternating days to reduce class sizes. In addition, you have social media and main news outlets, which are having that conversation of, what are the protocols? What is school going to look like? And how are we going to keep our children safe? How are we going to keep staff safe? And then that layer of just constant uncertainty, which is just, we found just emotionally exhausting. And so at the beginning of the school year, we have 76% of students that are falling out below borderline clinical threshold. So that means they're feeling or experiencing a normal level of stress. And then you jump to 12% at borderline clinical threshold. So the stress is starting to creep up. It's starting to impact their performance. And then it jumps to 12%, which is above clinical threshold. And so that means that the stress is at a level where it is impacting their student performance. We again did the assessment at the very end. So this is November. And what's important to keep in mind when you're looking at this is that the context hasn't changed. COVID is actually increased to the point where the Saskatchewan government had just released increased safety protocols. And this was our students' responses. They were feeling all right. 95% are below borderline clinical threshold. It's not that we had a few that just kind of bumped down a bit. And so we're very confident that this is a clear snapshot of the students. The population of the class did not change significantly to impact these results. And this was just, again, verified through the journals and the observations.
So students wrote in their journals several times a week. They provided impressions, feelings, and feedback on activities. They were also good in providing us feedback, for example, when we were examining student fitness levels, how much screen time they've got, how much active time. We also used resources by mindfulschools.org, which we also used to teach students mindfulness. Observations were more than just passive data collection. They were based on conversations with students and active feedback. So we were looking for changes, suggestions. It was a very active and dynamic and collaborative process. I also kept a journal of what was going on in the classroom, and Angela and I would meet weekly to make sense of the observations, and this time to reflect was really valuable.
So at the end of the study, we directly asked the students to rate the usefulness of these activities. And so what was wonderful to see is that how highly they ranked all of them. So the students liked the approaches, and it was clear that it had an impact on them. And we also kept in mind through our reflections that this is something that was requiring a lot of feedback and adjustments. This wasn't a cookie cutter approach.
So beyond the obvious benefits, we found that for mindfulness, there was a whole raft of other things that came along with it. Over the course of the study, I had broken fingers, students who were frustrated on a daily basis to the point of tears. All those little things tapered off. They got better. They were easier to deal with as students developed mindful practice. So a student injured on the soccer field, if I run over to check on them, they're already doing mindful breathing to calm themselves. So it had a good impact on the tone of the school and the way the students interacted with each other.
So this quote, just as we felt very reflected what many students had said in their journals by the end of it. And again, we read and reread these journals looking for particular themes. And so, yeah, yes, I would like to continue mindfulness. Mindfulness calms me down and the class, and then it's easier to work.
So this quote is from a student who wasn't as crazy about the mindfulness. But every single student recognized the benefit of doing mindfulness, whether or not it was their favorite thing to do or not. Some of the research we read also suggested that students who were dealing with trauma, mindfulness may be contraindicated. What we did find, or what I found, actually had a case of this week, where talking to a student who's finding themselves stuck in a feedback loop during our mindful time, is we work out something alternate. So that student is coloring instead of doing the mindfulness with the rest of the students, and it has many of the same benefits.
So for the benefits of outdoors, our initial thought was, okay, reduce transmission of the virus, physical activity is important to mental health, and time outside, it's all connected. But what's interesting to see as the study progressed, that as students were returning to school after a period of either poor attendance or self-isolation, it was very apparent that their physical fitness had declined. And so just thinking about that, we went back to the research and looking at studies to kind of match, I guess, what we were seeing. And so we found studies that existed before the pandemic, and they were looking at and surveyed youth and matching their responses to a document called the Canadian 24-Hour Movement Guidelines for Children and Youth. And so that's how active should a child be? How sedentary should a child be? How much sleep should they have in a 24-hour period? Before the pandemic, that number was 20%. The same researchers then went back during the pandemic and asked it again, and that number dropped to 2.6%. So the time outside became even more important to us because we know that they walk farther, they play longer, and are in nature, which is all connected to mental well-being.
The benefits of using technology on a regular basis in the classroom are that students are ready. We wanted to have a smooth transition to online learning, and I think we achieved that. More importantly, though, we found out that because teaching is all about relationships, this helps students connect with each other and help me connect with them and their parents on an ongoing basis. It had benefit.
So again, a question that we ask students is, do we continue doing this? And again, the response from them was very supporting and yes, let's keep doing this. They had no suggestions for changes, which just verified that what was being done was working. And so this is a picture of the class just this week. And again, you can see that we're continuing these practices. It's about, again, connections, connecting them to the environment, connect them to each other. And yeah, it was just an amazing experience.
Thank you
Ellen.
both. Brent, I am going to cut you off there. Thank you both for the presentation. We are going to move on to Kirsten Kavanagh, who's presenting on strengthening schools to support the needs of refugee students.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here this evening. I'm Kirsten Kavanagh, and I'm thrilled to be sharing the research myself and Janet Akoko have been working on. I'm just going to share my screen here. Right, and you can let me know if you don't see it. All right, so as an EAL teacher for the past 10 years, I've worked with countless newcomer and refugee students. Parental involvement for refugee families became the focus of my master's research as I was looking for ways to support a growing number of refugee families in my school and realized how little research there was in this area. Janet Akoko is an associate professor in the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan and is currently studying the experiences of newcomers in school with regards to parental involvement. Given the type of research she was doing, I reached out to work together. When COVID happened, I became interested in the experience of my refugee students because of my interactions within the school, and I wondered how families were coping and handling with the transition to online. I felt the need to do the research to get a deeper understanding of the experience they were having. In response to the humanitarian crisis in Syria, Canada has welcomed over 44,000 Syrian refugees to Canada since 2015 through an initiative called Operation Syrian Refugees. Government data shows 1,280 school-aged children have resettled in Saskatchewan since 2015. However, this data excludes privately sponsored refugees, so a significant portion of the refugees are excluded from this number. Schools are an important place for families to find support through their classroom teachers, administrators, and the school community. In addition to regular classroom supports offered to all students, refugee students have access to an English as an additional language teacher. EAL teachers provide prioritized scheduling for language instruction to support students. The EAL teacher also liaisons with the families and the settlement support workers in schools. So the schools also have an official partnership with the Saskatoon Open Door Society, and they work together with other organizations throughout the city. Educators have identified parental involvement as the primary vehicle by which to elevate academic achievement. Epstein's 2010 model provides a comprehensive framework, and she has identified 6 types of involvement, including parenting, communicating, volunteering, learning at home, decision-making, and collaborating. For the purpose of this research, the focus is on the 4th type of involvement, learning at home. Parental involvement for refugee families presents a number of issues and challenges. These include socioeconomic needs, dissonance and cultural clash, which means educators must facilitate culturally responsive parental involvement. Leaders need to be cultural advocates, and knowing that 80% of our government-assisted refugees who enter the country do not have a strong grasp of English means more supports are required to improve these relationships and aid communication. As of March 20th, 2020, schools closed due to the spread of COVID-19 and students began learning online. Parents and guardians became responsible for the children's participation in online learning. In September 2020, many families opted to stay online and the Online Learning Center Elementary opened. It currently has 1,970 students from kindergarten to grade 8. The Saskatoon Public School Division responded by offering online instruction to all students. To date, according to the Chief Technology Officer, 1,019 Wi-Fi hotspots and 1,438 laptops have been handed out to students in the Saskatoon Public School Division. Saskatoon Public School Foundation launched the Cheer Crate campaign in April of last year, and they will do this again in June. While Saskatchewan welcomes refugees from a variety of countries, including Eritrea, Iraq, Sudan, and Congo, Syria was the focus of this study because of a growing number of families from Syria in Saskatoon Public School Division. As well, throughout COVID-19, educators have been seeking out ways to best support Syrian refugees with the at-home learning situation. And we know there is a lack of research on parental involvement for refugee families. So, speaking to the families paved the road to support these children. And more specifically, we benefit from knowing how Syrian refugee families can be supported during at-home learning to ensure student success and what role the schools play in supporting Syrian families in their child's education. So this report is based on a study that used the phenomenological approach. 5 families were purposely selected based on their ability to speak English, their contact information being known, elementary aged children, that they'd entered through the Operation Syrian Refugee Program, and that they attended at-home learning either during school closures or through the Online Learning Center. First, I sent out a short survey with an informed consent and I collected demographic information. After that, open-ended interviews were conducted through Zoom, ranging from 30 minutes to an hour, and informed consent was received and privacy and confidentiality were adhered to throughout. The analysis began with a process of just transcribing the recorded interviews and then coding. Text was separated into structural and descriptive elements, and from within the descriptive category, unique topics were identified. The structural column identified major topics in response to the research question, and Epstein's framework and direct quotations were extracted. The interviews gleaned realizations about the family's experiences during COVID-19. Families spoke of positive experiences. They talked about the quality of the teachers and their appreciation of the teachers guiding their children's learning through the pandemic. They also spoke of the ease with which it was to get to and from the learning and the ways the division ensured access to the technology through Wi-Fi and laptops. While at-home learning offers many convenience benefits, families spoke about instructional issues and a lack of resources. They felt the lessons moved too quickly and they didn't offer an opportunity for their children to be heard. The teacher all the time talking, and not asking the children who's second language learner. As a result, she stated her son stopped, listened, and remained silent all the time. As well, participants spoke about how their children were given the support for in-person learning when they didn't understand what was being taught, but with online, that support wasn't there. Previously, when they didn't understand, the teacher would take them to a different class and explain it. One participant suggested having another person available to clarify for students who become lost online. Parents spoke about being asked to print materials at home, but not having a printer that works or ink replacements on hand and being unable to complete the work. Secondly, with reference to parenting, participants spoke about the ways their children are distracted from the learning. For example, younger siblings entering the Zoom lesson. As well, they spoke about the extra work they had to do while their children were at home. They must prepare meals and snacks, clean the house, and ensure their children are where they need to be. Families did frame the relationship in new ways, explaining how the effective role of sister or friend defines the way they are interacting with their children during the pandemic. The added at-home work, which comes along with online learning, is reflected in the way families spoke about how the pandemic has delayed their ability to learn English, which impacts their ability to find work, support their children's learning, help with the homework, and communicate with a teacher. The importance of learning English was emphasized by every single participant. All families interviewed were at a beginning to an intermediate English level. One participant explained how improving English is the most important and urgent thing for him. Currently, teacher-to-parent communication means the parent goes through an interpreter to speak to the teacher, and she emphasized how it impacts the message. Improved language levels help families help their children. One participant believes having his children at home online has prevented him from gaining 3 English levels and acquiring the level he needs to get a job and be a better support for his children's learning. Based on the findings reported, we came up with some recommendations. To begin with, there needs to be avenues available for the extra people to support learning during at-home learning. These people include educational assistants, resource teachers, care partners in the older grades, counselors, and volunteers. The individualized support prevents students from shutting down from the learning and enhances home-to-school partnerships. The family members interviewed spoke about the ways they learned cooperatively in the home. Families provide alternative explanations and strategies in their first language. One participant spoke about using Arabic to teach the math equations their children were learning at school. More outreach to families with an explanation of the progression of, say, math skills would enhance the home-to-school connection. A few of the families talked about how they learned new grammar points together as a family, watching YouTube or English shows together. Providing strong language learning resources enables families to meet their learning language goals at a faster rate. In order to provide more variety to the learning, off-screen manipulative kits or print packages could be provided. Participant 3 asked for activities which her son could work on, which wouldn't require the printer or ink. Regular communication with families is paramount. There are a range of ways to connect with families, from email to phone and text. If available, many families appreciate user-friendly apps such as WhatsApp. This closer communication and connection enables families to share their students' and children's struggles and success. There needs to be more opportunities for student check-ins. As Epstein states, homework expectations must be laid out in easy to understand terms so parents can be involved in the learning. In the absence of stopping the teacher in the hall, time must be set aside for students to ask questions, receive clarification, or understand expectations and outcomes more clearly. I would like to end this by just sharing how disproportionately hard the pandemic has been on these families. While many families have felt isolated, this has been exaggerated for Syrian families. For these families, they haven't been able to develop a community or learn the language needed to reach their goals. Schools are so much more to these families than just a place for their children to learn. Now I'll pass it back over to Ellen.
Thank you, Kirsten. So I'm going to invite Associate Executive Director Ian Cripps just to share a few things from a bit of a provincial perspective. While he's doing that, if you do have questions or comments you'd like to direct to any of our research teams or to all of our research teams or the broader group, do feel free to start accessing the Q&A at the top of the screen. So Ian?
Well, good evening and thank you. And we're delighted that you could all join us this evening to hear what these researchers have discovered and accomplished through their hard work over the course of this year. I'd like to, on behalf of our provincial executive and membership of the Federation, thank you all for your work and your research and your study this year as you really demonstrate what teacher professionalism is about. And I'd also like to thank the board of the McDowell Foundation for their support and their guidance through this time and to ensure that we have some timely research that we can work with. Certainly what has been shared tonight resonates with what we're seeing nationally and what we're seeing provincially as teachers have worked diligently and really hard through the pandemic. Much of what was shared tonight exists in or is echoed in the research that has been carried out across the country over the course of the year. And a few things that I think are really important. I think the key message that we should all take away tonight is the importance of listening to teachers. Especially as planning occurs within the education sector. The voice of teachers, the professionalism, their expertise, their professional practice, and their ability to dig into the challenges in front of them and apply a variety of methodologies to those problems is critical to the success of our systems. And so as policymakers and those in decision-making places go from this meeting tonight, I invite you to really think carefully about how the voice of teachers can be incorporated more and more in the planning as we respond to these unprecedented times. Some things that we have been seeing going on in the sector. I'm using a non-paper device, sorry, and I'm getting glare. What we do know is that teachers' experiences have been profoundly varied across the province and across the country. Some teachers have lived in essentially the hot zone. They've been in multiple quarantining situations over the course of the year. They've worked incredibly hard just to have students in class or to keep some sort of sense of normalcy going. While other teachers in some locations have had almost a virtually normal time, except for all of the other protocols that they've had to incorporate into their practice. And so we have this really great variety of experience. And through all of that, I think what we're learning is that as teachers work in those varied contexts, that, again, their expertise is really important. Another thing that we know is that teachers have worked incredibly hard and that they're tired. In fact, they're exhausted. As was pointed out, this has been the hardest year of their careers in terms of their work. Teachers have had to, on a dime, change their entire mode of delivery and practice, their entire ways of communicating, assessing, and doing the work that they do. And I can't think of very many other industries who had to switch how they work and the ways in which they work overnight and then expect their clients to be in the very next day. Other things we're seeing is that teachers are very concerned about relationships. And as you heard all of these presentations tonight, they're about relationships and the huge importance of those relationships between teachers, their students, their colleagues, their families that they work with. They are also very concerned about their students with exceptional needs, ensuring that they get what they need. One of the presentations talks about continual adaptation of instruction to ensure that they're meeting the needs of students. They also discuss virtual fatigue, and it was interesting to see as Brent and Angela presented, how do you mitigate that virtual fatigue? What are the other ways that you can instruct students but help make sure that they have the energy and they have the skills to engage in that space? And I think that's really critical. Also thinking about our English as an additional language students across Saskatchewan, and as Kirsten has pointed out, the unique challenges there to maintain connection with parents, maintain connection with students, and then work across a language gap and a cultural gap makes the job even harder. So teachers have worked valiantly over the course of this year to provide high quality education to students all across the country, and especially in Saskatchewan. One other thing that has come up in some of the research that is out there are some benefits to this time, and we heard about that tonight. And so while teachers were quickly went into learning how to do online pedagogy, that first shot at remote emergency learning certainly was not online pedagogy. It was float the boat until June and then start a new school year. And certainly over the course of this year, teachers have really dug into their online pedagogy here at the Federation. When things shut down in the spring 1 year ago, we had about over 4,000 teachers connect with our professional learning staff to engage in how to work in this virtual space. And so it shows you how quickly teachers are willing to adapt, and it shows you how quickly they're willing to invest in their skills so that they can meet the needs of their students. Over the course of this year, they have really refined that. And as we heard in the research tonight, teachers are going to add those things into their pedagogical practices and use those in unique and new ways as they go forward. And that's an exciting development. Teachers also noted that their professional collaboration increased. That's because they needed each other like they've never needed each other before. And so teachers really leaned on one another as professionals and really increased their collaboration in order to best serve their students, their communities, and the families. And the other place that they also found some benefits in relationships with parents, because in this virtual space, that communication has occurred much more than it might have in face-to-face instructional scenarios. And so those have been some of the benefits of working in this time, really challenging time in circumstances that we've never seen. But I think the one thing that also comes out in all of these reports is the notion that schools need to be better resourced. Coming into a time like this, asking people to significantly change their practice, meet needs in ways that they've never met them before, requires that additional resources be added into schools and into the lives of students. And what it will mean is for the next number of years for those resources to continue to be in place. It will take time to get ourselves back to where we were prior to the pandemic. It's going to take additional resources to support our English and additional language students, our students as they learn and use new technologies, as they recover the skills that may have been lost over the time they've been out of school. And so those resources will continue to need to be in schools, and that's just beyond the staffing. That is to make sure that all of the other things that they need to have a rich and productive experience are there. And so again, thank you to our researchers for sharing what you've learned tonight. It's exciting to see. It'll be exciting to see how this, the implications for practice as we go forward. And hopefully, as we share this, our decision makers and our policy makers in Saskatchewan will listen to your voices and incorporate what you have learned into their decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. If you can stick around for the rest of the event, there may be some questions and comments that head your way. So I appreciate you stepping forward and sharing things from a bit of a provincial level today. We don't have a question yet, but we do have a comment that I'd like to share from the question and answer. And I actually have a question to kind of tag onto it. The comment is that the writer really appreciates listening to the projects and for all the hard work that was put in on these projects in the middle of a pandemic. And I guess that's what I'd like to address to the research teams, any of you who would wish to speak. What was it like adding research to this as you continued your teaching and your other work within the pandemic? How did it affect your research? And what were some of the challenges and successes you might like to share with us? So who would like to kind of jump on that one?
Can I jump on it? Because I'm not answering as an educator because, I'm retired. So I have a little more time, but I was interviewing teachers. And I had set timelines because I thought, September, we could have everybody interviewed by the end of October at the latest. Well, that didn't work. It was surprising how many teachers asked if I could call them on the weekend or call them over Christmas holidays, because that's when they had the time to really think about and answer the questions. So a lot of the interviews were done weekends and holidays.
I don't mind going next on that, because I kind of have basically the opposite perspective. I teach grade 7, and so and I was also in a psychology class finishing up a degree recently that was basically all about data compilation and surveys, how to properly do surveys and stuff like that. So I felt like this was a perfect real life opportunity to kind of to test that out. But then the other aspect that, to be honest, the most rewarding aspect that I found from it was, as we saw in our research, teachers are really feeling right now like they don't have a voice. They have a lot of great ideas and they have a lot of things that they want to say, and they don't really feel like they have a platform to get out and say those things. And so one of the things that I found most often when I've been talking to people, letting them know that this event is going on, that I'll be speaking at it, etc., was just kind of like a, well, thank you. I've been yelling all these things for so long, and I feel like nobody's listening to me type of thing. And so it was kind of just oh, good, somebody's gonna listen to the teacher's perspectives type of thing. And so that really made me want to do it and made me really happy that I did.
Thank you, TJ. Brent, did you or Angela have something you wanted to share?
Sure. Yeah, there was a challenge. The teaching during the pandemic is challenging. Changing my teaching practice during the pandemic has been challenging. Trying to document that and incorporate student feedback, it's all been challenging. It's also been very, very rewarding. And I wouldn't presume to speak for Angela, who's faced her own challenges during the pandemic, but I would point out that she went straight from finishing her master's into suggesting that we do this project. So I think that she certainly felt up to the challenge.
Well, I think, yeah, and then watch me pull another one of these. So for me, I think doing the particular project that we did, and with the amount of stress that had been dumped onto a position like mine, it gave a lot of time for reflection to help me adjust my teaching to meet the needs of my students. And I work at a transitional high school for youth at risk. And then before the pandemic, I was working in Brent's class. And then, of course, everything changed. And so, again, practicing mindfulness, not just with myself, but again, having those conversations with Brent and comparing what was going on with my students in my class. And then I got dumped with grade 7 online at the last minute. So, and I've never taught that before, and it was all new. But it was interesting to see the parallels between all of these 3 locations that I was a part of. And yeah, I thought that was just like, again, helped me emotionally work through this year, I think, and help me guide my practice and make me a more effective teacher.
As Ian pointed out, that professional learning just continues, doesn't it? I mean, it's part of that whole professional identity, the continual learning, even when literally the world is falling apart a little bit. So thank you for that. Kirsten, was there something you wanted to add to that comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, having like my own children at home, there was a lot of shifts that happened throughout the year when they couldn't go to school, then they're at home and I'm shifting my schedule around. And usually whenever I did research prior to this year, I would go to a quiet like coffee shop or to the library, somewhere where there weren't little people in the background. So adapting to being in everyone's space when you're doing the work was a big part of the research, a difference, I guess, to the research that happened this year. And I also have not yet met my co-researcher. So we haven't met in person. So we talk all the time, but we haven't had the opportunity to actually meet in person. And yeah, so however, there were some benefits. For example, the calendar in the evenings is empty. So usually I would have social and extracurricular activities, but and those would take up so much of the schedule. But so it made it easier to have that extra time in the evening to work on the research. And participants' families were also at home, so they were also eager to share and available.
Thank you for that. I think that's been something we've all adapted to, is the evening schedules being a little freer, or the evening schedules looking a lot more like this than they used to. So I think that has been one of the hidden benefits of the pandemic, perhaps. You know, it lets you reach people in different ways, but it also maybe frees up a little bit of time. I notice we have another question up here. Despite the very diverse settings articulated in the studies, what extent do you think teachers' sense of professionalism and commitment to their students help them cope with the challenges of the pandemic? And I guess what I'd add to that is you have an opportunity to speak to some of the individuals that I mentioned at the beginning that are joining us tonight. What do you want to tell them about what it's been like and what you've drawn on to make this year work? So again, jump in, anyone who wants to address that. I'm not going to specifically call anyone out.
I'll start. I think the number one thing that I would say about this dealing with teaching during the pandemic is it's broadened the fissures between the students who have resources and those who don't. Students who don't have the support at home or don't have the support of the community have so much more of a challenge during the pandemic. And it's really stretched resources to try and deal with that, to try and pick up the slack where we're getting engagement with parents and engagement with students who find it just easier to drop out and hope that this year again, if they don't show up, they'll still get into the next grade. It's been, of many things, that's certainly been the one that it's really highlighted, is that growing gap between kids with support and kids without.
Thank you, Brent. That's certainly been highlighted in some of the research that we've seen as well. And I know that a number of teachers are experiencing it on the ground as well. Would any of the other panelists like to respond to that question?
Yep, I can jump in. One, like from what our research showed us quite a bit is there was a lot of, I am exhausted, but I don't know if I wasn't putting in this online teaching as well as the everyday teaching type thing, I'm very worried that my students would fall very far behind. And so the research showed that aspect definitely did play into it. And then I know, just like from my own experience with my classroom, I teach grade 7 this year, but a lot of the kids I actually taught in grade 5 as well. So a lot of them I know very well, and with the lack of engaging with other classrooms, our group has just become very tight knit with each other, and the friendship bonds are growing a lot closer. Everyone's getting to know each other a lot more, and because of that, it's really given me a much greater appreciation and understanding for the struggle that is teachers who are also parents, because I know I just have been putting in so much emotional effort into my students, and I care about them so much, and then I get to go home and I'm still worried about them, but I at least don't have anything else running around here to worry about. So that gave me a much bigger appreciation for how difficult it must be emotionally, not just time-wise, for the teachers who are parents as well.
Well, and if I can just add to that, from that perspective of someone doing the interviewing of all the teachers don't say no. They say, okay, can I do it at another time? But they still found time to do the interviews, even though there was no time in their day to do it. They did it on their own time. So I think we have to be very careful about the load that we put on teachers, because there's that feeling that I've got to get this done, so I'll just keep going. And I'm not sure that the people who are giving them those additional things, like I mean, I said, okay, good, you'll do it on Sunday. Sure, I'll interview you on Sunday. So I'm not sure that the people who are giving them that workload realize that the teachers are finding that additional time as well as everything they're already doing.
Thank you for that. I think that both speaks to the professionalism of teachers that we've been talking about throughout, but also to where that may go and some of the risk that may see. Ian, did you want to add anything there?
Yep. Yeah. So much of what I've been reading over the course of the year, and you read plans from other places, and certainly from in Saskatchewan, it's always we're doing all these things. Oh, and you know what? Teachers can do that. So we'll make sure that we have something for teachers. And oh yes, and teachers can do that. And so we'll make sure we have something for teachers. Oh, and yes, and teachers can do that. And yeah, we should have another PD thing for teachers. And pretty soon you're left wondering, when are they going to teach? Because that is their main job. And it did come up in this research as well, all of the other things, and those things have to happen if you're going to teach. And that's why teachers need supports. But I think there needs to be a really careful and thoughtful look at how much gets added to teachers' plates at any time. This time being a bit unique, of course, but it's always one more PD thing, one more thing that they need to attend to. I'm a strong advocate for, I want that teacher to be a superstar at instruction, at assessment, at communication, at relationship building. And those things are important, and teachers need them. And when they need them, they will ask for them. But it's also important that we don't overburden them so that they can do a phenomenal job of what it is that they've been educated to do.
Thank you, Ian. Kirsten, was there anything you wanted to add before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to share how invested families are in their children's education in this time, and wanting to have the skills to help them have a good future. So they are really appreciative of the time taken to understand and understand the supports needed based on their various ethnic, racial, religious, and other marginalized communities that they're from. So it really does make a difference for them, it does make a difference, and it does ensure that the students are successful. So just wanted to pass that on.
Absolutely. And it's always important that we not come from that deficit perspective. Well, it's really important to look at that broader database and say students of lower social economic status and that have other, things going on are struggling. It's also important to remember the level of commitment that that parents and students have to succeed, and always to come from that positive and that strength-based approach. So thank you for that. So we've got about 20 minutes left. Where I'd like to go now, and I see there is a question within the Q&A on this. What do you think, and I'm going to use the phrase the person asked, a post-pandemic school would look like, but even what do you think next year's going to look like? When I and the board envisioned this directed call, I don't think we envisioned a third wave, to be perfectly honest. I don't know that we envisioned this being quite what it was, but looking around at where things are at and where things may be in the fall, where do you think this is going to go, and what do you see for next year?
Did you ask me that?
I can ask you that, Ian, but
no.
do any of the teachers wish to speak first? And then I promise I will let Mr. Cripps speak.
I don't work at a school. I thought I heard my name. Sorry.
Yeah, from my region and from my area, what I am seeing is a shift of resources and teachers moving to support an online school. What I'm seeing also at my Youth at Risk program is we are getting a different clientele. We have our youth at risk students, and now we are getting those who do not succeed in online learning and at their high school level, failing their credits and now coming to our school. So I see an increase in online programs, and I see a huge increase in schools like mine, which are transitional high schools or credit recovery programs.
Something we've certainly been talking about at the provincial level, what is that going to look like? And we've been using the phrase connection gap. How are we going to address some of these gaps that are going to occur? DJ?
Yeah, and so I think really. And so what the research showed us, and based on my personal experience as well, morale this year, especially right now, it's very low in schools. Everybody's exhausted. Everybody has their own very difficult things going on, whether it's with to do in the pandemic or something else on top of all the things going on with the pandemic in the schools. And morale's really low. And then you add on top of that, a lot of people are still very afraid of being in the classroom right now with the high case numbers, most teachers still not being vaccinated yet. And so with that being the case, I think there's a lot of trapped feeling and worried feeling. And so I think a post-pandemic school year, I think there's going to be a lot of appreciation for just for kind of normalcy, as well as I do think the technological aspect is going to be highly beneficial in the future, because like many in the survey said, yeah, it's really tough right now, but it is going to be nice in the future to have these things in our toolkit as well. And so the technological aspect of being able to use a Google Classroom as an agenda, definitely not standardized because not everybody has access to those type of things, but as the option to use those in different situations, I think it will prove beneficial in the future.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Suzanne, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd like to add, as someone who's been in the classroom and teaching and researching for almost 40 years now, I think I can tell you what I'd really like to see. I would like to see mental health become part of every day so that it doesn't become an add-on. We need to teach self-care. And we saw it in the presentation. We need to teach mindfulness. We need to prioritize ourselves, and our classrooms need to be small enough to build and keep those relationships so that it's not a mental health worker coming into the school, but it's our teachers working with our students in a classroom where they know the students and they can work on those self-care skills, the mindfulness skills. They can work on coping strategies with their students when they need. And that's the mental health supports that we need for both the teachers and the students. So in the ideal world, that's what I would like to see in our schools.
Thank you. Kirsten or Brent, did you want to say anything before we move on?
Sure. I think I'd echo somewhat what Suzanne just said. The kids who are coming back next year are going to have all kinds of challenges that have been building over the last year already. And dealing with that is going to take resources and time. Teaching is all about relationships. And if there are things that can help with that, whether it's smaller class size, whether it's more adult bodies in a classroom to attend to students who are working at different levels, whatever it takes so that we can engage students, get them in the classroom, get them comfortable and make it feel like they're succeeding, that's what we're going to need, because it is just, what's already hard is going to be harder.
Absolutely. Kirsten?
Yeah, just one quick point about student voice. So that came up in the research for online, and I think it applies to any type of learning, that every student having the opportunity to be heard in the classroom is really important, whether we're online or in person.
Thank you for that. Ian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Not much more, because I don't know if I can say it any more eloquently than what has been already said. I think we do know, and we have seen referenced lots this year, that people are going to want to be back together, and it's about those relationships. So I think, people are coming back to classrooms when they can, because they want to be with others and engage in that way, and that's such a rich opportunity. But this I think a blended environment is definitely here to stay, because I think there are many opportunities, as people have already referenced, in that blended learning environment, that you can do some things live, but you don't have to, you can connect in some other ways. And that really is the reality of the world. A story from my life today, we were having a meeting, and I think with a consulting firm, and some of the folks were in Manitoba and some were in Vancouver, and a whole bunch of us were here. And so it allowed us to, do a great deal of work without having to put a bunch of people on the road to do that. And so I think it'll allow us to do some different kinds of things. I think one thing I'm concerned about is that in the quest for efficiencies, and it was referenced in Suzanne's presentation, not all the subjects work the same. And so while, certain scheduling regimes like blocks and quints and things work really well for some subjects, they really don't work for some other subjects. Because some subjects, you want people in continuously over the course of the entire year. There are some things you can pick up and quickly and move on. So we're going to need to think about that as we restructure some of the concrete things within our systems to make sure that learning stays authentic, and to make sure that things are experienced in the way that they're supposed to be experienced as students are learning them, so that we don't feel like we could just check off the list really quickly and say, well, we got that done in 6 weeks, now we can move on to the next one. I'm a musician, and the notion of doing music for 6 or 8 weeks and then you're done for the year kind of doesn't make sense in my world. It's a discipline, something you do all the time. And that you have to do all the time. And so, I hope that as we're recrafting the system and reshaping the system on the other side, that we think carefully about those things.
Thank you, Ian. I see that that Susan's put a comment or a question in the question and answer, and it was where I was looking at going next. So thank you for that, Susan. My experience with teachers is teachers are eternal optimists. I spend a lot of time talking to, now maybe I get a different group of teachers as McDowell researchers, but I don't think so. I think teachers are eternal optimists. I think going back into the classroom every day is some of that. There's always something new to learn or to teach or to experience. So Susan asks, while this has been a really challenging year, what has changed in your practice that you've experienced this year that you're going to end up carrying forward? So what are the things you've found that are working and could impact your practice as you move forward in your careers? So I'd invite any of you to respond to that.
I can go. One thing, I don't know if it's necessarily changed, but definitely reinforced how I go about things and how I want to continue to go about things in the future, is especially with the lack of time that we have with so much reinforcing of protocols, et cetera, less focusing on the content and more focusing on you building skills, building positive habits, and using the content to build those skills. And so, yes, while we may be learning French verbs one day, really the purpose of this assignment is time management, and we're going to use these French verbs to build proper time management so we aren't procrastinating. And then for this assignment, we're working on, we just finished up a project. It's called, in English, it's called My Ideal Week. And it hits a whole bunch of curricular outcomes from different subjects, but really the purpose of it is teaching them how to live healthy lifestyles. And so that's a really big one for me, is using the curriculum and the content that we need to teach life skills and reinforce positive habits and positive behavior.
Thank you, TJ. Angela, did you have something to say? Sorry, now I'm picking on you. Anyone else like to comment on this before we move on?
Well, I'd like to add one thing. I've really enjoyed the SCC, School Community Council meetings over Zoom. because in the past I would go to the various school SCC meetings and there'd be maybe 5 people there. Now, when they're over Zoom, you've got parents and their children, and the last one I was at, there were almost 100 people. So it's really nice to have that additional participation in those evening meetings. Because they've been done electronically, more people can attend. So I hope that continues.
Thank you. Anyone else before we move on? We do have one more question sitting in the chat, so.
Yeah, I'll add my 2 bits. Basically, our project, what we did, I'm going to keep doing. Take kids outdoors, work on mindfulness, work on those online learning skills, especially so that we can keep kids who are irregular attenders engaged.
Thank you, Brent. Sounds like good teaching. So the question in the chat, and this maybe Brent, I will direct this to you and Angela. The question first is wondering, how did the students respond to, or how did the parents respond to the students engaging in mindfulness? How did the parents respond to this teaching? And I guess I'd broaden that out a little bit just to ask more broadly. How did parents respond to some of the adaptations that had to be made over the course of the year? How did it shift parent interaction? What are some of the successes and challenges you might want to share from that as well? So we'll start with you, Brent, and Angela, whichever of you would like to speak. But I'd like to extend that out to the rest of the panel as well.
Angela, you want to take a crack at that first?
From where I stood with this project, I got to see the parents' responses. We tried to get the parents to respond to the RCADs, to the parent portion of it, and a couple did respond. And so I think that those that had responded, we didn't have enough to actually include in our project, but I feel like they were more anxious than their children were about returning to school, just based on the couple samples that we saw. And I feel like they were very appreciative of our approach. And I really appreciate, again, the buy-in that we had and the family support that we had for our project.
I think that we had reasonable buy-in because people viewed it as a project that we'll try this and we'll see how it works. And so they were willing to play along. I know of other teachers who've incorporated mindfulness into their practice who have had issues and resistance, who have had parents who've had difficulty with it. But our response was one of, yeah, okay, you're playing with this. All right, we'll play along. And mindfulness certainly wasn't the only thing we were trying that was new. The part of, I think, what made it successful is a lot of communication. So I have a web page, I have a Facebook page, I have texts to parents. So they're very aware of everything that I'm doing. A few times a week, there'll be pictures of what the students are up, so that on a closed Facebook page, so that they can see for themselves what's up. And, you know, I think people feeling like they're included in it makes buy-in easier.
Thank you, Brent. Kirsten, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, I was just going to add that families they're keen to try the new technology, software, and programs. I actually anticipated this being a major issue for families, and it really wasn't. Issues were separate from the parents willing to learn the technology and figure out the programs their kids were using and needed for the online learning. Like, they were really happy and willing to learn. And that didn't come up at all in the research. They were very on board with learning as well.
Excellent, thank you. And I knew Suzanne and TJ, you worked with teachers. You did not work with parents and students, but if you're welcome to add anything if you have it to add here.
Well, and I think, again, just from the teachers thought that there was really good parental engagement on the, parent-teacher interviews, all of the things that worked. They thought that it was a good tool to continue using.
All right, TJ, you're good. I'm just giving you that. I've been learning about this, the brief pause, so I think we'll keep going. Thank you for that. I see we don't have any more questions in our Q&A, so if you do have anything you want to add, do throw something in there. Something I would like to draw your attention to is while our panelists were talking, I did put some bibliographies that the Emma Stewart Resource Center, which is of course the library of the STF, has put together. One of them has been on specifically on COVID-19, one on mental health, and then a third one on refugee students. So if you are interested in following up on additional resources of some of the things we've been talking about tonight, I can't say enough about their facility. I can't say enough about how well they've adapted to COVID. We use the word pivot very, very carefully, but the way they've pivoted is just remarkable. So if you would like to follow up on any of these areas with some of the resources, they'll find a way to get it to you one way or another. So just as we're wrapping up for the evening, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite each of the three research teams and then Ian just to share some final reflections. We have a number of individuals in the room who will be thinking about what school looks like next year and in the future. And I would invite you to share what you would like to share with them. This is your few minutes to talk to some of the people who are going to be making decisions in education over the next few years. So I'd invite perhaps Suzanne and TJ, if you'd like to go first. I'm going to give you about 4 to 5 minutes. That's kind of the max. So.
Well, I can start, and I think that it's really, really important that we recognize that there's a heavy workload out there for teachers already, and to be a little more discerning and careful before, as Ian would put it, well, teachers can do that, you know, to really think through what we're asking of teachers. But more importantly, that teacher voice, to provide an opportunity when every decision is made so that there's a response, or the teachers have an opportunity to give us their feelings about how it's working, how it's not working, and then to provide time to change. Not to, this is how we're going to do it, but this is a trial. Let us know how it's going, and let's see how we can fix it, you know, when we get the feedback. So those were some of the things that came up again and again, because otherwise we're putting teachers in a position where they're required to do things with materials that don't necessarily work for the situation. So that almost evaluation of everything we're doing through the eyes of the teacher, who is, again, the professional. But the difficulty is, how do you do that in a way without adding more work? You know, sometimes I've heard, you know, let's just tell me how to do it because I don't have time to, you know, think this through. But we've got to provide the time for the consultation and the feedback for teachers. Otherwise, we'll never improve the system. So that's it from me. That's the number one thing.
Thank you, Suzanne. TJ, did you have something to add?
Yeah, wonderfully said. I was basically going to say something very similar, and I think it really just all comes down to exactly like you said, listen to our teachers. I think it's so important that whether it's the ground floor level of in-school policies or division-wide policies or even government education policies, we need teachers involved, having their voices heard, because who better knows what's going on inside a classroom than the ones inside of the classroom. And so, yeah, I think that's absolutely it.
Thank you. Brent and Angela, do you have anything to add? This is your moment.
Brent, do you want to go first? Okay, so yeah, no, my one is, so it's one thing to do benchmark assessments. It's one thing to identify the learning gaps. It's one thing to find the time to find the resources, to learn the resources, to fill those learning gaps, or practice the RTI model. You can't do that with human beings. So in rural schools, we are trying to fit the student to teacher ratios, and we keep getting cut. We need bodies. It's not even just time. We need human beings to do this.
Yeah, the only piece I'd add to that is effective teaching is about relationships. And if a teacher is stretched too thin, whether it's trying to deliver a program or trying to stretch too thin, trying to deal with too many students, those relationships are affected. What Angela said, basically.
Thank you, Brent. Kirsten?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate how important it is for ensuring that we have connection with the refugee families. When parents and teachers, when we work together, the results can have a really positive impact on the child's development and their learning. And the communication lines, when they're clear and appropriate supports are put in place, the children can attend to the learning. So yeah, I think, you know, these will help the school divisions and the province align the priorities for the benefit of the student learning. So
Thank you so much. Ian, did you have a couple of things to close with before I finish us up?
Yeah, but I don't like going after all the smart kids. Like, what do you say then? So
that's the punishment here. Go ahead, my friend.
You guys all stole my answers, but I am going to say them over again. I think I was writing before you started talking. So, you know, really, it's important that our policymakers and our decision makers listen to teachers, and Suzanne said it very eloquently, and as did everyone. Listening is one thing, authentically engaging is another. So teachers need to be in the places where decisions are being made. Their opinions need to come back, and as Angela has pointed out, time needs to be taken so that those things can come into practice. It takes time to integrate something into your practice and to do the work to get something to where it needs to be. We need to give time as we come back next year, and whatever that's going to look like, and who knows at this point. That time and space needs to be given for that rebuilding of relationships. Learning will come. And like my colleagues at Professional Learning say all the time, Maslow before Bloom, you know, really spend time paying attention to the needs of our students before we get on to the other things. They will learn. And I think as Kirsten knows, you know, students who've come out of refugee camps and who haven't been in school for years and years and years flourish when they have access to resources and wonderful teachers, and they catch up. Our students will be the same. They will catch up, and they will get to where they need to be. And I think another thing that I think we all need to remember that's really important, and I think is really key in this time, is that school is actually almost the last common institution in most communities these days. Now I'm going to sound old. So, you know, back when I was young, you know, there were these common things that we all did together, and there were these common institutions like the Elks and the Lodge and the church and all of these other things that were very common, and they're still very common in some communities, but in many communities, the last common institution is the school. And it's the place where everyone goes. And it's the place where everyone knows that there's support there, and I can send my child there and they'll be safe, and there's someone that cares for them. And so we need to really think carefully about what the role of schools is in our communities across Saskatchewan. And then, as Angela has pointed out, we have to make sure that we have the right number of bodies in those schools to really serve our students well and help them achieve and reconnect and rebuild those relationships.
Thank you, Ian. As we think and talk, or have been thinking and talking over the last few months, the phrase "the connection gap" has come up a number of times, and that's what I have really heard echoed here tonight. Teaching is about relationships. Good teaching is about relationships with students. It's about relationships with parents. It's about relationships with communities. It's about relationships with each other. And I admit I almost showed my age when you were talking about, you know, school being the last common denominator. For some reason, the theme to Cheers was running through my head. You know, you want to go where everybody knows your name. And I think for next year, a great deal about hopefully us getting back to more of a sense of normality for many of these kids is going to be going where somebody knows their name. And for many teachers as well, I think that connection is going to be incredibly important. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight, especially to the panelists. You guys spent your summer writing a grant proposal for me and for the Project Review Committee and the board. You have spent the year, many of you, while teaching in a pandemic, doing what I would consider absolutely outstanding research And then you took time tonight to come and share it with us, with policymakers, with other teachers. And I'm just so grateful to all of you. When we imagined this last summer and thought, is anybody going to want to do this? We couldn't even imagine having outstanding teams such as yourselves apply and be successful. So thank you so much for all of the work you've done. The work you've done, I'm confident, is going to situate us very well for thinking about how do we move forward as we do this work. The mission of the McDowell Foundation is to enrich teaching and learning by supporting professionally led research. Research like you've heard tonight. These researchers have come together to ask some very difficult questions about themselves, about their schools, about their future, and about what their profession is going to look like. And we're so pleased to have provided the space for them to share with you tonight, as well as the resources for them to take on this work. We hope these conversations continue in staff rooms, in boardrooms, and anywhere where decisions are being made. And we hope the voice of teachers and of students who are shared through their teachers is very much a part of that work. Thank you to all of you who have participated. Ian, you as well. You didn't get to have to do the research, but you still got to come play. So thank you to you as well. This is the kind of work that makes the foundation so important. This is the kind of work that makes it so vital that these kinds of events happen. The foundation exists because we believe in the professionalism of teachers, the need to ensure that research comes from all of us, not from the States, not from the East, but from right here in the province, from the teachers who are working every day. Thank you to our many donors, including the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. You ensure we can continue to do this work and provide space for teachers. So for more information on the McDowell Foundation or for any of the work we do, you feel free to visit us at our website, mcdowellfoundation.ca. Maybe throw us a donation or two. That's what lets us do this kind of work. So thank you so much for everything that you've done tonight. Have a very good evening and we'll talk soon. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.